Hey, welcome back to the course. This is episode number 4. In this episode, we're going to be looking at something called task scheduling, and we may also look into queued jobs. So effectively, task scheduling is where you say, I want you to do this every day at this time, or every week, or every month, or every year, or even every minute, for example. Very similar to cron jobs. In fact, it is pretty much just a cron job. So the way it works is you run a cron job, you set up a Linux cron job, or on Windows you do a schedule. You set up a cron job to run the Laravel scheduler every 1 minute, and then the scheduler will decide if it needs to run all of your other jobs. And the benefit of this, rather than just using plain old Linux cron, is that you can keep your processes in your Git inside of your repository, which means that if you're sharing your code, everyone can get set up so nice and easily. It also means if you shift between servers, it all shifts with it. You just have to set up that one cron job. So effectively, the way we do it in Laravel is usually by calling a sort of a command in the terminal, a PHP artisan command. Now, luckily, you can create your own commands. So you can have any format, PHP artisan command, whatever, and you can run that in the terminal. But then you can also set up the scheduler to run that command at specific intervals. And then jobs and queues are effectively, you have a queue and it processes jobs when the server is less busy. That's how it's meant to work anyway. And the idea here is that heavy processes in a job so that they can be run from the terminal rather than from the HTTP requests. And what this means is that, let's say you got a big job depending on an API, or perhaps you're encoding video on the server side. You don't want to do this between requests because the user is going to sit there on a loading screen waiting for the page to refresh. Instead, what you do is you tell the user this is going to happen soon. You create a job for it. The server will do it when it's not busy, and then it can perhaps notify the user when it's done. So, for example, YouTube does this. You upload a video. YouTube needs to encode it into all the different formats for all the different platforms and resolutions. So what it does is it goes, okay, we've got your video. Leave it with us. We're going to process it. And then we'll email you when it's done. And that's the whole idea behind jobs. It takes your heavy jobs, your heavy process, your heavy scripts, and does it in the background and lets the user go and do something else. So that's the idea behind this. I hope that made sense, but maybe these examples will help a little bit. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a command. Now, as I say, for schedules, we're going to use the schedule to run a command. If you're used to doing like regular vanilla PHP, there's a couple of things you might have done. You might have created a PHP file that runs in the console, specifically one PHP file for each job, and then set up a cron job for that. That's a common way of doing it. Or even worse, to be honest, you could have a PHP job and then from the cron, you hit that URL using curl or something like that. So you literally hit the live web server URL. Not recommended because of timeouts and things, but a lot of people do that. I'm guilty of that as well. So anyway, back to the point, we're going to create our first console command, and you'll see here in the documentation, they give you a nice little helper to generate these commands. So PHP artisan make command send emails, for example. This used to be called console, so if you're used to older versions of Laravel, bear that in mind. I've been working on 5.2 lately, so this kind of threw me off a little bit, but it's called a command. So PHP artisan make command, and I'm going to call it delete old messages. And the idea behind this command, it's not really useful in this context, but I just wanted a demo. Every 1 minute, we're going to delete messages that are older than 10 minutes, or older than a day, kind of like how Snapchat will clear out memories, or clear out stories rather, after 24 hours. We're going to do that. So we've created that command, and now we can find the class by going for delete old messages.php. This is an app console commands delete old messages. And in this file, they've effectively just set up the sort of base, the template for creating an artisan console command. So you'll see here we've got a protected signature variable equal to command name. And this is the actual command that you'll run in the terminal. So I'm going to call it delete old messages. Now, as far as I'm aware, there's no real naming convention to how you name your commands. It's entirely up to you. Bear that in mind though, just maybe stick to the same thing the whole way through. Command description, we're not going to worry too much about that, but effectively when you type in PHP artisan help, I believe, you can get a list of all of the commands. So maybe you'd want that there, but I'm not going to bother with that. And then we've also got this public function handle which is where we actually do whatever it is that we've got to do. So in here, I'm going to go echo whatever, and then I'm going to go \n. Now, if you're unfamiliar, \n will just issue a new line in the console so that we can see this a bit better. So I'm going to run PHP artisan command : what do we call it? Command : delete old messages. And we get back whatever. And you'll see here the signature has the word command in it. We could name this to whatever we want. So for some of my things, I use the word nightly if it's a process that runs overnight when there's no users. But in this case, I'm going to leave it as command. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some actual logic, and this is going to be so simple. I'm just going to get all of the messages that are older than 10 minutes. So we can do this using message, and you'll need to import that class in here at \message. Message : where created at is less than, and then carbon. So carbon is Laravel's datetime package. It just is a bit nicer than Laravel's built-in datetime package. Carbon : now sub minutes 10, and then we're gonna count just to check that my logic is right. So basically, carbon now sub minutes does exactly what you think it does. It just returns a carbon object with the time minus 10 minutes. You can also pass in a string date, but in this case, it's always going to be dynamics. It's always going to be 10 minutes ago. And another thing that I've realized is that where there's a special sort of function for it, a special method for it for dates, and it's literally called where date. And it basically allows it to process this carbon object as a date and go where it's less than that time rather than where it's less than that time as a string. If that didn't make sense to you, just remember where date is for handling dates. So I'm going to go dd $messages, and that's going to just display the count of messages. Let's try that. And the number is 0, which is not correct, and that is because I've got my greater than and equal sign the wrong way around. So where created at is less than now minus 10 minutes, which should return 3 in my case. It does, returns 3 because I've got 10 in here. I've got 3 in here more than 10 minutes ago. That gets complicated, but yeah. And it's actually the created at date it looks at, not the updated date because of here. Okay, now that we've got that out of the way, we can just go $messages. Well, we can actually just go, instead of count, delete. And now when I run this, it's not going to say anything, but maybe we just want to add some kind of log here. So deleted messages \n. So now when I run it, we just get a nice little deleted messages. Okay, so let's test that with a message that is older than 10 minutes. Well, we've just done that actually. We've deleted all of our messages. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go PHP artisan serve, and we're going to have to create some messages. So I'm going to go what's on your mind, this is a test. And I'm going to do this just straight from the database. So user ID, we're going to say user ID is 1. This is a test created at, we're going to use the current time. And now when I run that command, PHP artisan command delete old messages, deleted messages, hopefully. And I see that it's deleted that message, which is not intended. Let's check on the date that was posted. So this is a test. I leave all of my mistakes in, by the way, because I think it's really helpful for debugging and learning how to debug. I reckon that the time is incorrect on my PHP server because I think it's an hour out. It's based on mainland Europe time. I'm in the UK. I probably should get that fixed, but nah. So I'm going to make this post 2 hours ago and deleted messages. That deleted because it was 2 hours ago. And if I create another one that was, let's say, user ID test, created that, let's put it in the future. And then I want to go back into here, PHP artisan delete old messages. Is that going to delete? No. So yeah, my PHP server's time is out of date. It's on mainland Europe time, which is an hour ahead of me. So basically anything that I create in Navicat or my straight into the database is always going to be an hour less than PHP's current time. But I've proven that the code works, that's all good. Not ideal testing environment though. So now the command actually works. I'm not really too fussed about what the command does because that's not really the point. We're going to go into a file called kernel, if you can spell it right, .php. And this is in social app console, or in your case it would just be app console. Don't get it confused for this one in here in the app HTTP folder. That's for something else. But in this case we want the console kernel. And in here, you'll see a function or a method called schedule. And effectively in here, you can set up schedules, as you might expect. So you do this by using the schedule object, and you set the command that you want to run. So in this case, the command is php artisan inspire. This is just a demo one, like an Easter egg that comes with Laravel, but it just gives you a quote of the day, I suppose, or actually it's just a quote every time. You get the idea, it's just for fun. And in here, you set up your schedules. So we're going to create one. We're going to go schedule, command, and you don't need to include the PHP artisan, you just need the command. So in this case, it's command : delete old messages. And then you can say how often do you want to run this. So you can say every minute. And in this case, every minute is fine. You might be thinking so you can also do every 10 minutes. You might think that that's the best way to go, but actually, when you think about it, every minute, it's only going to delete ones that are older than 10 minutes because our logic takes that into account, right? If we run it every 10 minutes, then some posts, if they post it at the right time, could be there for up to 19 minutes and 59 seconds. But if we say every minute we're going to check, is there anything older than 10 minutes? Yes, delete it. No, don't delete it. Okay, now how do we actually test this? So what you would do is you would set up, if I go back into the Laravel docs, you would set up this cron job on your server. So basically what you say is php artisan schedule run, you run that every 1 minute by cron, and then Laravel will decide every time it runs if it needs to run any schedules. It's quite decent, it's quite nice. But in this case, I'm not using a full-blown server, so I mean, you're kind of just going to have to take my word for it. It's going to run every minute this command, and you can still test the commands by going php artisan delete old messages. In fact, actually, I can kind of demo it because I can say, I can copy the command and just run that manually every minute, I suppose. Running scheduled command, you see it's running the command delete old messages, and it finished, right? So we can test this. We've got a message there that's fairly new, but if I make it old, so if I make it yesterday, for example, and we run that, php artisan schedule run, and check the database, you can see it's gone. And you can assume that this schedule is running every 1 minute, but in this case I'm just doing it manually. Okay, that's enough of schedules. Now we're going to move on to jobs and queues. So in order to use queues, you're going to need a database table in order to store a list of jobs that need to be done and a list of jobs that have been done. You can also use various drivers, so you can use database, you can use Redis, you can do some stuff with Amazon, I forget what it's called, but there's an Amazon service that does it. There's so many different ones, and you can also extend this with packages that you might find on Packagist. But we're going to stick to databases, which is probably the more common one because it's so easy to set up. So we're going to run php artisan queue : table. So I've run that command, it's created a migration, and we know how to do this. Go php artisan migrate. And that's going to take our migration, and it's going to create the table. So in this case, create jobs table. Let's have a look at that. So in our database, we've got the jobs table, and we've got various different columns. The payload is going to store what to actually do. So it's going to store maybe the message ID or the user ID or something like that. So now, just like creating commands, we're going to create a job, a type of job. So we're going to go php artisan make : in this case job, and we're going to say send email. So there we go, we've got a class called send email, and we can find that again by going and searching for sendemail.php, and that is in app/jobs. Okay, so in here we've got a construct and we've got a handle. Just like with schedules, see, Laravel is built to make everything obvious how to use it. So if you know how to use queues, you can figure out how to use jobs quite easily. They all follow the same sort of naming conventions and stuff, so you always know what handle does, for example. And in this case, we're just going to go, I'm not really going to do anything here. I'm just going to say echo test, sure. I don't really want to get too into depth of setting up logic for sending emails here, because that's not really the point of this video. So we're just going to echo out test, and it's really quite simple from here. Let's say we wanted to pass in an object, so let's pass in a message. We can do that with the construct function. So we can pass in a message, so app/message $message. And what you're doing here, if you're not familiar, is you're getting a variable called message, but it must be of the object, of the type of object of message. I hope that made sense. And then we'll say $this message is equal to $message. And up here, we're going to need a protected $message. So what you're doing here is you're taking in a message variable when you set up this, when you dispatch this job, you take in a message variable, and this is an object actually, and then we store that message object in this global variable within this class, so protected message. And then we can access it in here, so we could go echo test $this message body. Let's say, I think that's what I called it, isn't it, in the messages table, body. This is absolutely not a use case that you would never need this, but this is an example. Let's say you're going to email out all of the followers with this message. So every time someone posts, all of their followers get a message or a notification. That's what you might do here, but we're not going into that. So we take that message in the body, and now we need to actually dispatch the job whenever we need to. So I'm going to do this by saying, let's see, we're going to do it whenever someone starts following us. So let's go into our controllers, app, HTTP controllers, profile controller, was it called? Follow or unfollow user, and if they follow, we're going to dispatch that job. Now you can find this kind of stuff in the documentation, so at the top here you'll find dispatching jobs. And it's really simple, you just use the name of the job type, dispatch, and then you pass in a variable. So we're going to say, here we're going user notify, but we can also, if we want to use the old-fashioned way and do jobs, we can say, what is it called? Send email, that's the job, : dispatch, and we can pass in the object, so we're going to say $user. So I've actually just changed this on the fly. We're going to pass in a user instead, because I think it makes a bit more sense. User, 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 and then we're going to say this $user name, I think. And then we don't need to delete old messages, so profile controller, we're going to go to the send email class, we're going to dispatch the job onto the list. So let's say we're going to go and open up this PHP artisan serve so we can actually see this. PHP artisan, we just have to type it, PHP artisan serve, and we can refresh now. So let's open up John Doe's account, we're going to unfollow him, and then we're going to follow him. Argument 1 passed to send email construct must be an instance of app message. This goes back to what I was saying up here. Where is it? Send email. In the construct, we pass in a type of object, and in this case, it must be a user object. You see, it's quite strict about it. It doesn't allow a different type of object. So let's try that again. Trying to get property name of a non-object. Let's see what's going on here. So user, this user. So I had the wrong name here. So it couldn't find this variable up here. Let's try that again. And there we go. So now we dispatch that job, and you'll see in the database, in the jobs table, nothing was dispatched. Now there's a good reason for this. By default, we're not using the database driver. Remember I said there's multiple drivers. We've got database, we've got Redis, we've got Amazon stuff. By default, the driver is set to sync. Now this is brilliant for testing because you can run the jobs in real time. It just runs it instead of doing it in the background. So great for testing, not very good for production. So we can actually change the driver that we're using to be database. So to change this, it's really quite simple. Open up the env file, which is where you've got all your settings, and you've got qdriver equals sync. So we want to change this up to database. And we're going to have to refresh the PHP artisan serve. So restart the server because it will cache the env file. And refresh. I don't need to refresh there. We're going to unfollow and then we're going to follow. So hopefully that's created a job. And you'll see it has. It's got a payload and it's got display name, app / jobs, blah, 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 blah. And it's got tons of information about this job. And then on the other end, the Laravel, when it runs the send email function or send email class, the function inside of it, it knows what to do because it's got all of the information right here. And then to actually process these jobs, you've got to run a command. I forget what this command is all the time. PHP artisan queue work. You run this in your console. So maybe you'd run a new console, cd social, spell it right. PHP artisan queue work. And I have to run this snippet every time because my PHP version is wrong. But you can ignore that. PHP artisan queue work. And you see it's going to process that job and it goes test John Doe. In reality, we'd be sending an email here. And I can leave this running because it's going to run the whole time. I've got two terminals open. I've got the web server and I've got the job handler, the queue worker. That's the word, queue worker. That's running also. So if I open this over here, I unfollow and then I follow, you'll see it's going to add a job to the queue and then it ran it a second later. Let's pretend that's a heavy job, so it ran it later. Okay, I'm going to leave this video here. I hope that hasn't dragged out too long. It's about 25 minutes. I hope that was useful. The context that I showed you here wasn't very useful. In reality, you'd have much better reasons for using jobs and reasons for using schedules. At the end of the day, it's just an example, and hopefully you can use those in your own situations and you could do a much better job of it than I did. So thank you for watching.
I hope you have enjoyed listening to this video. Please be kind enough to like it, and you can comment any of your doubts and queries, and we will reply them at the earliest. Do look out for more videos in our playlist and subscribe to Edureka channel to learn more. Happy learning!